Hey, I'm Hunter from SkillThrive, and in this video, you'll create this accordion in React using React hooks like useState and useRef. Let's get started. So in this course, we're going to be using codesandbox.io in order to write our React and actually render it, because then we don't have to worry about setting up a local environment on our machines. So to get started, you want to sign up for codesandbox.io, and once you are signed in and logged on, you can create Sandbox, and then go ahead and click here to create a basic React app. And once that loads up, you can see here that we have a really basic app that's just showing us a heading and then an h2 tag. Now the first thing we want to do is go ahead and create a components folder. So come over here and click on this icon to create a new folder, and let's go ahead and name this components. And inside this components folder, we want to create a couple files. And one of them is the Accordion.js file. And then we also want to create the Accordion.css file. And before we get started writing the actual component here, I do want to come into the style CSS and just go ahead and get rid of this styling here and go ahead and add some basic global styling. And the first one is going to be box sizing set to border box, which is going to make sure that we're adding the padding inside elements instead of on the outside. And then just go ahead and just zero out the margin and the padding. And then what we can do is come into the accordion and actually start writing our accordion function component. So the first thing we need to do is import React from React. And once we do that, we also want to import our styling, and that's going to come from Accordion.css. And then we can go ahead and start writing our component here. We're going to be passing in some props, and then that is going to return the following for us. So to start, I'm going to write a div, and this div is going to have a class name equal to accordion section. And inside this div, we want to first create a button, giving that a class name equal to accordion. And inside this button, we want a p tag. And this p tag is going to have a class name equal to accordion title. And within the p tag, we want to pass in the prop title. Then outside the button, I'm going to create a new div, giving it a class name equal to accordion content. And then let's go ahead and create another div here, giving this a class name equal to accordion text. And on here, we want to use something called dangerously set inner HTML. Now, the name is supposed to kind of sound scary because if you're using this incorrectly, it could be dangerous to your site. So let's say, for instance, you had an element on your site that allowed people to submit text. So let's say, for instance, they submitted some malicious script on your site, and then it ran on your site because you're using this to render out the HTML. But in this case, we're writing the HTML ourselves, so we're controlling what we're actually rendering. So I'll be sure to include some documentation in the description so you guys can read up on that and make sure you're using this safely. So let's go ahead and write out dangerously set inner HTML. And the way we can render the HTML is like so. So we'll do HTML, and then we set it to the props, and the prop is going to be called content. And then once we save that out, and we need to make sure we close this, we now have our accordion props, or excuse me, our accordion component. Now we do need to go ahead and export this so we can use it elsewhere. So export default, and then accordion. And now that we have this, we can go ahead and head back into our index. So I'm just going to drag this here. And let's go ahead and just get rid of this basic code here. And let's go ahead and import the accordion component. Then we can go ahead and bring that accordion in here. And we want to pass in some actual props here. And the first prop we want to pass in is the title. You can set this title to whatever you want. And then what we can do is we can set this to content and then pass in some filler text here. And to do that, I'm going to head to loremipsum.io and just go ahead and just copy this first sentence here. And then paste that in and then save that. So I'm not sure why we're not getting an update here. Let's go ahead and just refresh this. There we go. And now you can see the button, which has the title passed in and then our content. So let's go ahead now and just copy this accordion once more. And on this one, I'm going to come into the content and just paste this one more time. So we have a piece that's twice as big. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to come into the accordion again. Actually, let's come into the first one and copy this. Paste it in. And then I'm going to show you how you can write HTML within this content and show you how dangerously set inner HTML is going to render that out. So first I'm going to wrap this first line in a p tag. Then I'm going to add a break here, so a line break by writing this. Then let's go ahead and copy this and paste it again. Then write another line break and then paste in that and then save that. And then let's go ahead and just make sure that this looks a little nicer here. Okay, so I'm not sure why this isn't rendering out. Let's go ahead and refresh that. Okay, there we go. So you can see that you see the p tags and then you see the breaks, and then you can see how this one is double the height of this one. All right, so now I'm going to add the styling to this, and I'm not going to write the styling out. I'm just going to copy it in and then talk about what the styling is doing, because this isn't really a CSS tutorial, it's more of a React tutorial. So I'm going to come into Sublime here, and I already have the CSS here. I'm just going to copy this in. I'm going to come in and drag these Accordion CSS over and then paste that in. And again, I'm not sure why this is not rendering. I have to refresh it, which kind of defeats the point, but that's okay. Let's go ahead now and just talk about some of the classes here that are really important. And the first one is the active class. So you can see now if we hover over these elements, they're going to have a darker background. But what we want to do is pass in that active class when we click on one of these elements. So once we are not hovering on it, it's going to stay that background color of the darker gray. Now another one we want to talk about is accordion icon, and we haven't created the chevron component yet, but it's going to have a little chevron or like a little arrow on the right side that once we click on it, it's going to rotate 90 degrees by passing in the rotate class here. And that rotate class is going to be added in based on if the class, or excuse me, if the state is set to active. And lastly, we are looking at the accordion content. Now what we're going to do later is we're going to set the max height to the content to 0. So let's go ahead and just write that out. So like max height and set that to 0. You can see that the content goes away. But if we set that to something like 100 pixels, you can see the content is going to appear. Now, you'll see too that it's not appearing here because it's actually larger than 100 pixels. So we're actually going to get the value or the size of each individual accordion dynamically and then pass that value in so no matter how big it is, it's going to know how big it needs to make the actual, the content. So let's go ahead and just delete this max height for now. And the next thing we want to do is go ahead and create a chevron component. So let's come back into our chevron file here, or excuse me, our folder. And then I'm going to create a new file and then pull in or create a chevron.js file. And then what I want to do is I'm going to come to fontawesome.com. And once you're on Font Awesome, you can go ahead and search for the icon you want, which is going to be chevron right. And once that icon shows up, we can go ahead and open it up. And then we can click here to download the SVG. Agree and download the SVG. And then once that's downloaded, we can come in and let's just go ahead and open this into a code editor like Visual Studio Code. And then I'm just going to copy this, come back into our project, and go ahead and write a simple component here. So import React from React. And then go ahead and write our function component here. This is going to be called chevron. It's going to take in some props. And then it's going to return the following. So let's go ahead and just paste the SVG in. And if we save that, Prettier is going to space everything out and make it look good. Now, what we can actually go ahead and just delete all this stuff right here, keeping the last two. And then I'm going to pass in some values here. So let's do class name. And this class name is going to be props.className. Then we can set a height, setting that to props.height. Then we can do width, passing in props.width. And here on the fill, we can go ahead and pass in a prop as well. So let's do props.fill. And then we need to make sure we export this. So export default chevron. All right, so now that we have that, we can actually start using the chevron and the our accordion. So let's come into our Accordion.js file, and let's go ahead and import chevron from the component folder. And then we can go ahead and set the chevron here right under this p tag. So we can go ahead and just pull in that component, and we can set the width prop to, let's do 10. And then we can set the fill prop to the value string of #777, and then go ahead and close out that prop. So if we come in and refresh this, you can see now that we have this chevron icon here. And now once we have that, we can actually start writing and using some React hooks in order to get some of the functionality that we want here in this React project. So the first thing we need to do is we need to import use state from React. So if we come up here, let's go ahead and just import that here. And that's going to be use state. All right. And now what we can do is we can go ahead and set a state here without actually creating a class component, which is what is really cool about React hooks. So we can do that by setting const. And then the first value we set here in this array is the name of the state. And in this case, we're going to call it setActive. And then we can name what we want the function to be that changes this state. So in this case, I'm going to set that to setActiveState. And then here's where we call useState, passing in the default value, which in our case is just going to be an empty string. So now that we have that, we need to write the function that we're going to be passing on when we have the onClick event on the button. And I'm going to just go ahead and write a function here and name that function toggle accordion. It's not going to take any values. And the first thing it's going to do is it's going to do set active state. And it's going to look at the set active state and see if it's empty. If it is empty, it's going to set that to active. And if it's already set to active, it's going to just use an empty string like that. So now that we have that, we can actually pass it in on the button down here. So on the class name here, right now we just have this written out and hard-coded. So let's just go ahead and just delete this. And then we can write it like so. So we can do the curly brackets and then our template string, accordion. And then we can pass in that state value like so. So set active. And then we can go ahead and also pass in the onClick event. And when this is clicked, we want to call that toggle accordion function like so. So let's come in here and refresh this. And now once we click on this, if we hover off, you'll see that it stays that color, because if we come in and inspect this, you'll see that the active class is now added. So once we click on that, keep an eye down here and you'll see the active class is removed. And once we stop hovering it, it goes back to the default color. So you can see again, active is added, then removed. So now that we have that, we'll create a new state called setHeight, which we'll use to set the max height of each accordion element. And this will be used to create the sliding animation effect. We'll also use useRef, which is a React hook, to create a reference to the element we want to expand. And once we add that reference, we can access data off of it, like the scroll height. And we need to use scroll height instead of something like client height, because what's really cool about scroll height is that it allows us to measure the height of the content, even when it's not visible due to the screen, or due to it being set to overflow hidden. So if we come back into the Accordion CSS here, you can see that overflow is hidden, which once we set this to a max height of 0, the overflow of that is going to be hidden, but no worries, because scroll height can still calculate what the height of that element should be, or how much room it actually needs. So with that said, let's come back into the Accordion.js here. And the first thing we want to do is we want to use the useRef React hook. So first we need to actually import that here. So let's come in and do useRef. So now that we have that imported, we can actually use it. And let's go ahead and use the let's go ahead and create a new state here for setHeight. So let's do, so setHeight is the name of the state, and then setHeight state is the name of the function that's going to change the state. And then we can call useState, and the default value that we want here is going to be 0 pixels. Okay. And then we can go ahead and create our reference here. In that reference, we're going to give that a name of content. And here is where we use useRef. And we can go ahead and pass in a default value of null. So right now, there's nothing actually being referenced here. But before we actually set that reference, let's go ahead and set the setHeight, what that's going to do in our toggle accordion function. So let's do set height state. And what this is going to do is it's going to look at the set active state and say, hey, is it empty? And if it is empty, it's going to set it to active. Or excuse me, it's going to set it to 0 pixels. And if it's not, it's going to set it to the following template string. So it's going to pass in the value here of content, current, and then scroll height. And then it's going to add px at the end. So instead of just a number, it's going to actually be the number in pixels. And once we save that, we now have that function ready to go, so we can pass it in to our content below. So let's come down to this content down here, and let's go ahead and tell it that we want to reference this. And what we want to reference is the name of that reference, what we set up here, the constant. So it's going to be equal to content. And then we're going to pass in some inline styling here to set the max height. So let's go ahead and write in some inline styling. So max height. And the max height is going to be equal to whatever the set height state is. So we can go ahead and write a template string like this and set that to set height. Okay, so now you can see, because the class is not active, the set height is on 0. And let's go ahead and, just so you have an easier idea of what the scroll height is doing, let's go ahead and just console log that out. So let's do content, which is the name of the ref. Then we can get data on it on current. The data that we want to get is scroll height. So if we save that and refresh it and open up our console, you'll see once we click on here, 55 is printed, 74 is printed, and then 132 is printed. Now, it looks like we're getting an error, or we're not actually getting that to actually expand because we might have an error or at least a typo here. So let me just check that out really quick and make sure that we're not running into any problems here. All right, so I found the typo. The typo is here in this set height state function. So instead of looking and seeing if set active is set to nothing, we want to see if it's set to active. And if it is set to active, then we want to change that and set it back to 0 pixels. And then if it's at 0 pixels, we want to use this actual value. So now let's go ahead and save that, refresh this, and once we click, now we can see that expanding. So that was just a little typo that I had there. All right, so now that we have that, it's almost done. We just need to essentially do something very similar with this chevron. So once that, it's going to check to see if that is an active class, and it is, it's going to either add or remove the rotate class name on the icon. So the first thing we want to do is we want to come in and create a new state here. So let's do const, and then we can name this set rotate. And to change that, we want to use the set rotate state. Then we can call use state. And the default value here, we're going to pass in a string called accordion underscore icon. And then we can actually pass in this set rotate into the class name for our icon. So before we do that though, let's go ahead and actually say what it's going to do here in this toggle accordion function. So it's called set rotate state. And what this is going to do is something very similar to the above. So it's going to look at the set active state and check if it is on active. And if it is set to active, it's just going to use the default accordion icon class name. And if it's on accordion icon, we want it to actually add the rotate to it. So let's do accordion icon rotate. And then we can go ahead and pass that in, or at least the value of set rotate down here below into this class name. So let's come into the chevron here and add a class name. And that class name is going to be equal to the template string here like this. So template string, and then we're going to access the set rotate. So set rotate. So once we save that and refresh this, you can see now the chevron is all the way to the right because of the accordion CSS here for the icon. So we have margin left set to auto, and because we're using Flexbox, that's going to push that item all the way to the right. And now, once we come in and click on this, it's going to rotate 90 degrees. And there you go. Now you have an accordion React component that uses React hooks like useState and useRef. Please give this video a thumbs up and subscribe if you enjoyed it. And also be sure to check out our other courses from SkillThrive if you'd like to continue learning more about React, web development, and web design. Again, I'm Hunter from SkillThrive, and I'll see you in the next course.